Man creates peacekeeping robot. Robot realizes man prevents peace. Robot vows to wipe out humanity. It's a trope we've seen over and over again, but Joss Whedon does a good job keeping things fresh. Hey everybody, Alex here for Nerdy Inc., coming at you with the official review of Avengers: Age of Ultron. Making a sequel to the Avengers is no easy task. After all, it's one of the most favored and the highest grossing superhero movie of all time. If you walk into the theater thinking you'd be watching a similar film, you'd be mistaken, and you'd likely have the same reaction as many of the critics who were hoping for another lighthearted, movie magic popcorn flick. Marvel and Whedon took the film in a much different direction, and the only similarity between the two movies being the principal cast and the title card. Whedon promised us early on that this was going to be a darker film. Marvel promised us early on that it was going to be far more interconnected than its predecessor. Both parties delivered on this and other promises. I would be remiss if I didn't immediately dive into the portrayal of Ultron. While I didn't necessarily doubt Whedon that James Spader would be the perfect choice for Ultron, I wasn't 100% on board with the casting decision as soon as it was announced. And since trailers tend to suture different lines from the film together for the purpose of exposition, I continued to reserve judgment. Within the first moments of Ultron's introduction, I was completely sold. He was intimidating and humorous, ambitious and cynical. He commanded the screen in a way that very few characters have done thus far in the MCU. He delivered some of the best lines, both dramatic and comical, and he was one of the standout members of the cast. This is not to say that the other members of the cast were subpar. They delivered on every level, just in ways that you would expect. Since we've seen these characters before, they behaved in a very familiar manner. Newcomers Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch were welcomed addition to the cast as well. I was enthusiastic about Scarlet Witch, as she was unlike anything we've seen on the silver screen thus far. Quicksilver was a different story. It would be impossible for most moviegoers to not compare the Age of Ultron version to the Days of Future Past version. After all, it was for me. This version of Quicksilver is a better character. He is used in a way that better serves the plot, his origins and motives are fleshed out in a much better manner, and the actor does a better job bringing the character to life. That being said, Days of Future Past Quicksilver took better advantage of his speed, showcasing the slow motion effects and lighthearted pranks that made the X-Men character scene so much more fun overall. We are shown some things in slow motion during the action scenes, of course, but not always from Quicksilver's perspective. Every action scene was beautifully choreographed and shot in a way that showcased the action in a really crystal clear manner, whether this was done via slow motion or long tracking shots. No matter how it was done, there is no denying the action is bigger and the spectacle is more grand. As this is an action movie, I never felt the action to be over the top or drawn out. On the contrary, Whedon did an amazing job creating a different flavor for each of the major sequences. While the Hulk vs. Hulkbuster was the battle most heavily advertised, the final battle was a unique sensation. Despite raising the stakes, Whedon delivered a sense of claustrophobia with the final battle, which crafted a sense of tension the likes of which I've never felt in a movie of this size. I, like the rest of the Avengers, felt the struggle not only against Ultron and his drones, but in the greater conflict at large. Like the first film, the last 45 minutes or so are non-stop action, but this film doesn't have the same inspiring vibe that the original had, and I think that's for the better. The film differentiates itself from its predecessor enough to avoid auto-typecasting, or auto-type producing as the case may be. Because of the different emotions fans will feel when watching the film, Marvel and Joss Whedon have effectively found a way to prove that the Avengers can be either X or Y and still be the Avengers. This of course means that we as an audience must manage our expectations wisely. The film was not X, it was not told to be X, it was never advertised as X. Those who went into the film expecting that were likely disappointed. It's important to remember that Marvel is creating a rich tapestry with threads flowing in and out of each film. Because we are now, in essence, halfway through the MCU's road to the Infinity War, it's almost expected that this movie would serve as a crossroads for the many stories we've seen so far and the many stories that have yet to come. Because of the larger framework that exists, it's also important to not make sweeping declarations on its place in history quite yet. A handful of critics have given the film below average reviews, and the internet speculators have already lifted their picket signs saying the end is near for superhero films. This is a foolish path to take, both for the previously mentioned point regarding the framework, and because it takes time to digest a film. Upon exiting the screening and taking out my phone, I had dozens of texts from friends asking me if it was better or worse than the original. I refused to answer that question because I didn't have the answer. After all, I've seen the original film multiple times, but I've only seen this one once. This one's fresher in my mind, but the original is more deeply seated. If I have one piece of advice to give regarding this film, it's to avoid such comparisons. It will be difficult, of course, but don't see it as a sequel to the Avengers. See it as the 11th chapter in a continuously unfolding narrative, because that's what it is. At the end of the day, it still was a great film. It delivered exactly what I wanted, how I wanted it. I saw all the things I hoped to see, felt all the emotions I hoped to feel, and even got a few extra things thrown in as well. Oh, and Joss Whedon was not lying when he said there was not going to be a post-credits scene. There really isn't. It's at this point I'm going to get into some spoiler territory, so if you don't mind spoilers, or if you've already seen the movie, you're safe, but otherwise turn back now. I do want to touch back on that point regarding the newer characters. By and large, the thing I was most pleased about was Vision. I was glad to see that Marvel went all in with his appearance and tried not to downplay the unique look of the character. He was brought to life by Paul Bettany in a perfect way, and I could not have been more pleased with his appearance, his demeanor, and even his matter-of-fact sense of humor. Quicksilver, as I mentioned earlier, was also handled quite well. Unlike his Days of Future Past counterpart, I felt like this character had real emotions. The overwhelming animosity towards Stark and the other Avengers for the havoc they'd wrought in Sokovia, and an overwhelming sense of protection for his twin sister played far better for me than, oh, he's a prankster and likes to mess with people. His antagonistic turned competitive relationship with Hawkeye worked out quite well, and his final sacrifice to save Hawkeye did not feel contrived or forced once it occurred. No, I really didn't see it coming. While I don't want to say I'm glad he's dead, it does give the MCU its first real, meaningful, and hopefully permanent death, because while none of the Avengers know that Coulson is still alive, it does give special weight to the team, knowing that even an enhanced like them could fall victim to the whims of, as Dr. Banner puts it, murder bots. I must say I was also rather surprised by Captain America's relationship with Iron Man by the end of the film. I thought they were on surprisingly good terms. For a team that's about to feel the impact of a civil war within its ranks, Stark's retirement for the team seemed less like a shameful, guilty retreat and more like a chance to take a well-deserved rest. After all, this whole movie was his fault. Why does the team seem so relaxed around him? I guess we'll need to wait for the actual war to start until we have that answer. Oh, and for my favorite line of the film, while there were many great quips, my favorite line is a real simple one delivered by Ultron. During the final battle, Hulk jumps into an open hatch of the Quinjet and moves to the cockpit, disappearing from view. While we look out the rear of the ship, we hear Ultron give a brief, "Oh, for God's sake," before being kicked from the craft. Short, sweet, and full of mechanical exasperation. Well done. Anyway, there you have it. That is our review of Age of Ultron. If you've enjoyed this video, like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff is much appreciated, and we will see you next time.